Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And today is one of those days where we are going to try something different on this channel. We have a bit of a lull period. We already got a lot of the big horror releases for the month of July with Maxine and Longlegs. And so when we have these lull periods where nothing new is being released to go see and review, I like to take these times to explore something new, explore some sort of different kind of medium. And so for today's video, I am actually going to be talking about a VR horror experience, a virtual reality horror experience titled The Faceless Lady, that is actually co-created by Eli Roth. He created this immersive horror experience in partnership with Crypt TV and unfortunately Meta. So I know that like VR is not for everyone, and I know that not everyone has access to a headset. So this will probably end up being a pretty like niche video for only those of you that are interested in it. I myself am actually a pretty big fan of VR and virtual reality. I definitely see its drawbacks, right? Having to wear this like heavy computer on your face just to like watch something or play a game is not the most fun or comfortable experience. And from a content perspective, like I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of how do you write for a medium like this, right? How do you tell compelling stories with compelling characters within an immersive 360 experience? So there's still definitely a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of both the narrative and the technology. But one of the reasons why I love VR, one of the reasons why I've always found it such an interesting technology, is the immersive quality of it. I was always like one of those weird kids that would like go to museums and look at really beautiful paintings or artwork, and I just had this like desire to like go inside the painting, right? Like I could tell there was a story to be had within the painting, and I just wanted to like immerse myself in that. Like I just wanted to like go inside that story. So when I first discovered VR in I think like 2014 or 2015, kind of felt like that, right? It kind of felt like, oh, now I have the ability to actually like step inside a story and experience it that way. And I feel like having this kind of immersive environment really suits the horror genre, just because horror on its own is all about like atmosphere. It's all about like trying to put you into this environment and creating the sense of dread, anxiety, and finally that like release when something like really scary happens. So I feel like there's a lot of potential for horror storytelling within a medium like this. Horror on its own as a genre is already pretty immersive and interactive. The creaky old house, the dark shadows where something might be hiding around the corner, hearing odd noises, or maybe seeing something weird out of the corner of your eye and you're not really sure like what it is. And I feel like these are all like storytelling tools that go really nicely with VR, because you can play with things like sound and visuals, especially when you're putting someone in a 360 environment. And there are definitely 360 horror experiences that I've done that have been pretty terrifying. You could be looking one way and then something could be creeping up behind you and you're not going to know until you turn around and see it. So the technology is very effective at like actually putting you in the shoes of like a horror protagonist. I do think the immersiveness just adds something really interesting to the horror genre, and I'm really curious to see where this kind of like technology and storytelling is going to go as technology gets more advanced. I'm also genuinely curious like what you think of this technology, or just what you think of like technology and storytelling in general, right? I know right now like the big conversation is all about AI and storytelling, right? And this idea of like, are we gonna enter a future where we're just having robots that are telling our stories? And you know, none of us want that. None of us want that reality. But I am curious to see if there's a way to take like at least some of the benefits of this new technology and how we can incorporate that into our storytelling. Like, can we create these, you know, unique experiences that exist in tandem with like film and novels? But I'm curious like if you all even want that. And then of course there's like all this commentary happening right now about like the supposed death of the movie theater. People are not going to see movies anymore, like even big tentpole films that you think people would go to, like the Marvel movies. Or of course there was that whole, you know, disaster with like Furiosa at the box office just a few months ago. One of my favorite YouTube channels, Red Letter Media, just did a whole like video on this, a whole deep dive into the supposed death of the movie theater that is really great and I highly recommend you check out. out. But one thing that they talked about is how like 2D films, right, the kind of traditional theater going experience is going to become much more niche within the next like few years, right? People are just not going to go to theaters and experience movies in the same way that they used to. And as someone that co-manages a movie theater, like I think that's fair to say. So that's why I'm kind of curious about like this new technology and new modes of storytelling and how our already established genres, like how those are going to adapt to new kinds of storytelling. Let's take VR for example. If the technology gets a lot better within the next few years, right, where you're not having to wear such a like bulky headset, would you prefer to have stories where you can like literally immerse yourself in the environment and perhaps even take on the role of the protagonist? I guess very similar to something like a video game. Or are you still hoping that we'll have more like traditional 2D storytelling in the future? I'm very curious, so let me know your thoughts about that in the comments down below. Before today, I thought I would give a review of this VR experience that I checked out. So again, this is called the Faceless Lady. It's one of the first live episodic VR experiences. It came out in, I think, April, I want to say. The actual program itself was not filmed entirely in 360. It's actually a 180 experience. So it's like the screen's just a little bit wider. I'm guessing they probably did that so they would have the ability to put it on other kinds of platforms. So while I believe it's still just available on VR headsets right now, I could see them making this more widely available at some point in the near future. So what is this experience? So basically, the Faceless Lady follows this group of young couples. There's 6 of them in total. Basically, these couples have been chosen to participate in this game, in this very ancient, almost Victorian house in Ireland. Like it kind of looks like a castle more than a house, but this very grand and beautiful property, right? So they're participating in this game. They're going to have a series of challenges that they need to work through. And whichever couple comes out on top at the end, they will then become the new owners of the property. And the current owner of the property, who is the one that's orchestrating this game, has decided that he wants to hand it off to a couple that is worthy enough, right? And there's this whole kind of like theme in here about like love and like the strength of love. So all of the couples that are coming in here all have some sort of like baggage from the past that they all need to work through, right? And a lot of them say that the reason why they want to participate in this game and try to get this like new location to live in is because they want to try to start over with their loved one and try to get back to that sense of love that they had when they first started their relationship. And then what you also find out is that this house, castle, palace in Ireland is haunted by a couple of ghosts, because of course it is. And what you find out is the story behind the ghost is actually pretty gruesome. It was basically this king, I believe, this is some sort of like Irish nobleman at least, who was in love with this woman and wanted her hand in marriage. The woman was like, yeah, not into that. So she refused to marry him. And then basically he was going to force her into marrying him, right? Like kind of killing anybody in his way to get to her. And so she just decides to make herself unlovable in the ultimate way by cutting the skin off of her face. Hence why this is titled The Faceless Lady. So that action, like, right, her rage and just desire to not marry this dude ended up trapping both her spirit and his spirit within the house. You also find out that she had some sort of like connections to witchcraft because, again, of course. So it's a fairly like basic story, right? It's not anything that we haven't already seen before. I will say this, if you are someone that is interested in this kind of storytelling and you're someone that really enjoys like horror films that have these like game components, right, where you're having characters that are stuck inside of a location, bad things are happening to them, and they are given a series of tasks that they have to complete within a set amount of time, and if they don't, they will die. If you're into like that kind of like subgenre of horror, you'd probably enjoy this. I don't know if I would really categorize this as strictly like horror. It feels much more like supernatural thriller, and I say that because it's not like that graphic. This is not like a Saw movie, right, in which you have like games where it's literally ripping people's limbs off. And this is one of my criticisms of like VR experiences. A lot of VR experiences are very tame, which I guess is fine for right now. However, I feel like if VR or just like interactive media in general, if it does kind of want to be on the same level of like film or gaming or books, in the sense that it's really like telling stories about the human experience and kind of getting into like the human psyche. Like, I feel like to kind of be at the same level as these other narrative mediums, you kind of gotta be brave enough to get down and dirty a little bit. Not to say that everything has to be like gory, but right now a lot of VR stories, it feels like they're really like pulling themselves back a lot, and they're not really willing to push themselves in a way that film can. But I do think this particular experience, The Faceless Lady, one of its strengths is that it is that kind of like cozy horror, right? It has a very much like coziness to it. Again, it is taking place in this very like gorgeous old castle location. You go into rooms and there's like, you know, a fireplace in every room, and there's like a crackling fire, and you just hear like a bunch of like ghost stories. And there is kind of like a quietness to it, right? We were just having characters kind of going around this location and exploring things and finding out new information. There's a gothicness to it as well. And the fact that you have this like domestic drama at the heart of these hauntings, like that's something that we see a lot in gothic cinema. There's like kind of all of these things that are working together to give this a very like cozy feeling. I was reading one review of this that I saw on Variety, and the author of that article talked about how aesthetics of this experience make it look like a Renaissance fair. I definitely agree with that. Again, because there's like magic involved in this. There is a part of this experience in one of the episodes where one of the characters does go back in time. Again, magic. And yeah, that is definitely like Renaissance with people in the costumes. So that was fun. Like, that was actually a lot of fun to kind of be able to see, and again, really feel like immersed within the like 3D space of it. I mentioned this earlier, but this experience was filmed in Ireland. We could tell that they were definitely milking the Ireland location for all that it was worth. Throughout the 6 episodes of this miniseries, there were just like several drone shots that just showed like the beauty and the grandeur of Ireland, right? Everything was so like green and lush and just like beautiful to look at. The experience is almost worth it for that alone, right? Just to get to see the gorgeous landscapes. The one thing that I will say about the visuals is that it is lacking that like traditional like film feel, right? When you think of something like gothic, you tend to think of like, I don't know, like softer visuals, right? Kind of having that soft like film feel to it, something that feels a little bit more like dreamy, because that's another quality that you often see with like gothic films, is that it's kind of teetering on this place between like the reality and the fantasy, or maybe you could also think of that as like the conscious or the unconscious. I think of something like Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, for example, that's also taking place in this very like grand house, but there's like something about it, like it just feels somewhat otherworldly, and you're never really quite sure if what you're seeing within this house location, if that's like actually really there, or if it's just a projection of the characters' thoughts and imagination. And this is like one of the hard things about having like this kind of experience, because this story isn't so much interested in like bringing you within the headspace of a protagonist. This is an experience that's more interested in putting you in the same space as the characters, right? You're kind of meant to be watching them. It's not a thing where they're like looking at you and interacting with you, but you're still meant to have that feeling that like you're in the space with them, right? You're taking on a more objective like point of view. And again, there's just certain camera angles that still feel awkward in this medium. Like close-ups kind of feel weird. Like they do try to do like the traditional close-up, because of just the technology that they're using. Like it just looks weird. It kind of looks like character is like standing here, and then you as the viewer are kind of looking up at them. It's not like what you see in traditional 2D cinema, where it's like you would just have like the frame here showing you the character's face. Like, no, in this experience you have to like look up at them, which means that a lot of times you'll have these very awkward moments where just kind of like the camera is just kind of like at the character's like crotch level, and then you're meant to like look up at them. I was like, yeah, this whole like kind of close-up thing isn't really working. And again, because the experience is just trying to like keep you within the environment with the characters at any one point of time, like you are losing a lot of traditional film techniques that in a regular film would really help story, right? In terms of using like pans or long shots or any kind of like angle where you can like reveal something to the audience or to the characters. You have a character that is like within the frame, and maybe it's like a mid shot or a medium shot, but they're pretty much taking up like the foreground of the frame, and then the background, like you just see something like coming up behind them. That's very effective in traditional film. Here what they're doing, because they're using like these 180 or 360 cameras, like it's hard for it to get like that kind of like close, that kind of like intimacy that you usually get with a more traditional framing. That being said, I do feel like there are ways to achieve that feeling. I just don't think that this experience did that particularly well. I think that's the fun, but also the challenge of this kind of storytelling. Because you're in this experience and you as the viewer have much more autonomy in terms of like where you're looking, I think there's opportunity there to like reveal things, right? Or do like something kind of creepy, right? There were times when I was in this experience and I would be with the characters in a room. Say we're in the hallway somewhere, right? And I can see that there's like a big staircase up behind the characters, and I can turn and kind of look up and see what's going on in the staircase. And what I wanted from this experience was for there to be times where like I can look up and see something like a ghost or something creepy maybe like walking by. Like there was one moment in the experience where out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something like walking by the door, and I was like, oh, it's a ghost. So I rewinded the video so I could go back and like look and see what it was. But then when I went back and looked, there was nothing there. And then I realized like, oh, it was just a glare from my like lens. So I feel like this story could have done much more in terms of like creating like creepy moments throughout a whole scene, right? Because again, if you know that you're going to be immersing your viewer to this kind of experience and they're going to be looking all around, like use that to your benefit. And I think the reason why they didn't do that here and why I don't see it get done in a lot of other VR experiences is because of the challenge. Because you are not dictating the viewer's gaze and kind of the information that the viewer is getting at any point in time as you would with a film, there's always the worry that the viewer might miss something, right? You know, if I'm like over here looking for ghosts, but then the characters are like over here and like saying something very important that I need to know for the story to make sense later on, right? Like that's a problem. Again, I do think there's like a way to work through these kinds of challenges. I think a lot of these kind of narrative VR experiences would do well to maybe more influence from like gaming rather than film, just because in the sense that I feel like you could kind of gamify an experience like the Faceless Lady. Is there incentive within the story to then go back and try to find things that I might have missed my first time watching it? Again, the challenge with that is creating a compelling enough story for your viewer to want to like go back and keep getting information and keep learning more about like what's happening within this world. And just to go back to the actual story itself for a moment, the characters are not great. They're pretty like two-dimensional. You're having characters that are dying off pretty quickly. And again, these are like couples. So you're having like people losing their loved ones. And it's like, you know, someone dies and then there's like no reaction from the rest of the characters. Don't care, like let's just move on to the next thing. So that feels very unrealistic. And the whole theme around like love and trying to like, I don't know, heal love or unrequited love, like that went nowhere. This was not a like, oh, love conquers all type story. I don't know what the hell this whole like thing about love. I mean, I'm only mentioning it because they bring it up in like every single episode. There was really no like message behind it. Our protagonist doesn't learn a lesson by the end of it. So yeah, from a story perspective, like it does fall flat by the end. And again, this is why I'm saying like I feel like creators of like VR narratives would probably be served better to take more inspiration from gaming rather than like traditional film or TV. There are video games out there that create atmospheres and create stories and create really dynamic characters way better than a lot of like film and TV shows do these days. And I think that's like a good example of like how you craft a really good narrative while also crafting a really interesting interactive experience as well. And speaking of gaming, I would love like more VR interactive experiences, especially within the horror genre, that do allow for more like interactivity, because I feel like something like the Faceless Lady, you know, it's fun and it's cute for what it is, but it's still a fairly like passive experience. Like you're just kind of like watching it as it gets played out, right? So I would love it if there were things where you as the viewer could kind of dictate the story more, again, as you kind of do in gaming, right? Where it's like, okay, if I'm following a character around and then the character kind of has to make a choice, where it's like, okay, if I'm watching something like the Faceless Lady and I'm in this like gothic castle with this character and they have to make a choice, right? And I can kind of dictate what choice they make by wherever I choose to like look in the frame, right? Where it's like, okay, if I look right, then we're gonna go down that path and that's gonna give us like one story. Or if I look, you know, over here, then the character's gonna go over here and that's gonna lead us to a slightly different story. Like that's what I want more of. I want more of the like choose your own adventure kind of storytelling. I say that with the knowledge that creating these kinds of experiences is not cheap. It is very expensive to do, as well as very time consuming. So yes, all in all, like the narrative quality and the technological quality isn't like quite where I would like it to be to create a really like interesting experience. However, I will say I think The Faceless Lady is one of the better like horror cinematic experiences that I've seen. It's one of like the few things that Eli Roth has done that I actually find somewhat enjoyable. And yeah, I would be really interested in exploring more of these kinds of experiences. This is a goal of this channel. Like I don't want it to just be focused on horror films all the time. And so I'm also really interested in getting into like horror gaming, because gaming, not the like virtual reality stuff, like the more like traditional gaming, like that's a whole world I don't know anything about, but I'm very interested in exploring. I am not a gamer, although a part of me really like wants to be. I'm just not really sure like where's a good place to start. So if you have recommendations for horror games I should be checking out, or what's like really good like beginner horror games, let me know in the comments down below. So are you a fan of this new kind of technology? Do you like virtual reality experiences or just immersive experiences in general? Let me know your thoughts to all of this down in the comments, and I will be back very soon with a more traditional horror film review video. So I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.